Chapter 10. The following day, the three rangers, accompanied by Horace and Svengel, were on the road, headed for Castle Araluen. The others had watched with broad grins as Holt self-consciously kissed his new wife goodbye. Lady Pauline took their separation philosophically. When she had accepted Holt's proposal, she had known that their life together would be interrupted by urgent missions and sudden departures. Still, she thought wryly, it might have been nice if this particular departure had been a little less sudden, a little less urgent. Alice had stood beside her, waving with her as the 5 mounted figures cantered down the winding road that led away from Castle Redmont. Pauline glanced sidelong at her protégé and couldn't resist the tiniest vestige of a smile at Alice's set face. "Why so glum?" she asked innocently. Alice looked up at her, grimacing. "He's going off with her again," the young girl said. No need for Pauline to ask who she might mean. Alice and Will had been seeing a lot of each other in the past year, she knew. They had become very close. Now it obviously bothered Alice that Will was setting out on a mission with Cassandra once more. Alice knew that the ranger's apprentice and the princess shared a special relationship. She just wasn't sure how special it might be. "I've been trying to work out a reason for me to go along with them," she added, a little disconsolately. "To keep an eye on your investment?" Alice nodded. "Exactly. I thought I could volunteer to go as a companion to her, and as a diplomatic advisor. I'm good at negotiations, you know." "That's true." Pauline considered the idea. "In fact, it might have been worth suggesting. I would have supported the idea. Why didn't you?" Alice looked away from her now, her eyes intent on the small group gradually dwindling from sight. At least, Pauline corrected, her eyes were intent on one member of the small group. "2 reasons. I decided Will and Holt and the others didn't need the responsibility of another female to look after. If I were there, it would mean that much less protection for Cassandra. And she is the crown princess after all." "And the other reason?" Pauline prompted her. Alice grinned a little ruefully. "I thought I might succumb to the temptation of hitting her over the head with an oar," she said, "which would not have been a good career move." Pauline grinned in her turn. "And she is the crown princess after all," she parroted. The riders had disappeared into the fringes of the forest. Pauline slipped her arm inside Alice's and led her away from the battlements where they had been standing. "Don't worry too much about it," she said. "Admittedly, there is a strong bond between Will and the princess. That's inevitable after all they've been through." Her tone of voice indicated that there was more to be said. It was Alice's turn to prompt. But Will made a choice several years ago when he opted to remain a ranger. He knows that a ranger's life won't mix with life at court. A princess and a ranger just aren't a good match. And it would be twice as difficult when Cassandra eventually becomes queen. "Whereas," said Alice, "there's a lot to be said for rangers and couriers marrying." Lady Pauline allowed herself a slow smile. "Oh, indeed. Of course, the courier has to accept that the ranger will often be called away on urgent missions." "And he'd better accept that I'll have missions of my own," said Alice, abandoning the pretense of talking in the third person. Pauline patted her arm gently. "That's my girl," she said. "Why couldn't I go with the others?" Cassandra asked, for perhaps the 20th time. She was in the rooms that had been set aside for her use at Redmont, hastily cramming clothes into her leather travelling valises. Duncan raised an eyebrow at her cavalier treatment of the fine silks and satins she was handling. "Perhaps you should let your staff attend to that," he suggested. seeing that she would never get the lids closed on the jumble of gowns, cloaks, overdresses, petticoats, and scarves that reared up out of the cases. Cassandra made an impatient gesture. That's my point. They could have packed all this up. I could have ridden ahead with Will and Horace. And deprived me of a few last days in your company, Duncan said gently, and she instantly regretted her impatience. He was worried about sending her to a reader, she knew. He had made no pretense that he wasn't, and she knew he would worry from the moment she left until the moment she returned safe and sound. As she had the thought, she realized that she would miss his calm and confident presence while she was away, and his warmth. They might squabble from time to time, but it didn't change the fact that they loved each other deeply. She stepped towards her father and put her arms gently around his neck, drawing him to her. Sorry, Dad, she said softly. I'd like a few days with you too. The others have to get the ship ready, he reminded her. Riding back with me won't hold you up in the long run. He patted her shoulder. He could feel a pressure building in his eyes as tears started to form. He would miss her. He would worry about her. But above all, he knew he would be proud of her. Proud of her courage, her sense of duty, her spirit. You'll make a great queen, he said. Svengel lay groaning on the turf. His thighs were sheer agony. His buttocks ached. His calf muscles were on fire. Now, after he had tumbled off the small pony he was riding and thudded heavily to the turf on the point of his shoulder, the shoulder would hurt too. He concentrated on trying to find one part of his body that wasn't a giant source of pain and failed miserably. He opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the face of the elderly pony that he had been riding as it peered down at him. Now, what made you do a strange thing like that? The creature seemed to be asking. Gradually, as Svengel's focus widened, he became aware that other eyes were staring at him. 3 ranger horses for a start, and above them 3 rangers, all with the same puzzled expression. Only Horace and his larger horse looked vaguely sympathetic. You know, it beats me, Holt said, how these people can balance on the deck of a ship that's going up and down and side to side 3 or 4 meters at a time, yet put them on a placid old pony that's as gentle as a rocking horse, and they're instantly trying to get off again. I wasn't trying to get off, Svengel told him. He slowly rolled over and rose to his knees. His muscles shrieked in protest. Oh, by the great wallowing blue whale, why does everything hurt? He said. Then he continued his original thought. That brute of a horse bucked me off. Bucked you off? Said Gillen, hiding a grin. Did anyone see Plod here do any bucking? Holt and Will shook their heads. To his discredit, Holt was enjoying this just a little too much. During the Temujai invasion, he had been on board a wolf ship sent to verify Slagor's treachery. Svengel had been one of the crew members most amused by the reaction of Holt's stomach to the motions of the sea. Holt had a long memory, Will had learnt, when it came to people who laughed at embarrassing moments like that. He bucked, I tell you, Svengel insisted, standing more or less upright and groaning again. He couldn't quite straighten at the waist. I felt a distinct movement. He turned to the left, Gillen told him. Suddenly, Svengel insisted. The rangers exchanged incredulous looks. Plod never did anything suddenly in his life, Holt said, at least not in the past 15 years of it. That's why we call him Plod, Will put in helpfully. Svengel glared at him. That's not what I call him, he said venomously. Again, the 3 rangers exchanged amused looks. Well, yes, I'll admit we have heard some colourful language this morning, Gillen said. He turned to Holt. Who is this Gorlag character, by the way? And does he really have horns and teeth and long shaggy hair? He's a very useful person, Holt told him. You can invoke him by all of those different features. He's the very soul of variety. One never gets bored with Gorlag around. Svengel, during this breezy interchange, was eyeing the battle axe hanging from Plod's saddlebow. He wasn't sure if he'd rather use it on the pony or on the three rangers who were enjoying his predicament so thoroughly. Holt decided it had all gone far enough. He slipped down from Kicker's saddle and caught Plod's trailing bridle, leading him towards the aching Scandian. "You three don't have a lot of sympathy, do you?" he asked. The three rangers exchanged glances again, smiling at each other. "Not really," Gillen agreed cheerfully. Horace dismissed them with a wave of his hand and turned to Svengel. "Come on, I'll give you a boost." He held out his hands, forming a stirrup to help Svengel into the saddle. The Scandian backed away, holding his aching back with one hand. "I'll walk," he said. "You can't walk all the way to Araluen," Horace said reasonably. "Now come on. The best thing you can do when you've had a fall is get back in the saddle again." He looked at the three rangers. "Am I right?" Three cowled heads nodded. They looked like green and grey vultures, Horace thought. "Get on again?" Svengel asked. "On that?" Horace nodded encouragingly. "You're telling me that the best thing I can do, after this fiend from hell has lurched and spun and jumped and broken every second bone in my body, is to get back on and give him another chance at me?" "That's right. Come on, I'll boost you up." Painfully, Svengel limped forward, raising his right foot and placing it in Horace's cupped hands. The next part, the sudden convulsive leap upwards, involving all his thoroughly abused major muscle groups, was going to hurt like the very devil he knew. He looked into Horace's eyes. Honest, encouraging, free of guile. "I thought you were my friend," he said bitterly.